Technical Services and our recently released Notice of Support Availability, also known as the NoSA, around Pay for Success. We're anticipating today's webinar will last a little bit under an hour, but the length will vary a bit depending on the number of questions. So we'll try to answer as many questions as we can up until that hour point. Housekeeping before we dive in too quickly, in case you're new to WebEx. You probably already noticed all of the participants today are muted just so we can keep the background noise to a minimum. So you won't be able to speak to us today, or at least you won't be able to speak and be heard. We'll be spending most of the time at the end of today's webinar answering your NoSA-related questions. So the way you'll be communicating with us is typing your questions in at any time today into the chat box, which is most likely at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And you have a little screenshot of it there as well. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and type it in at any time, and you have a couple different options for who you send that to. So if you want your question to be seen by all of today's panelists and participants, you select Send to All Participants. If you want the question to come to us here at Urban, if you prefer to remain anonymous, you can send that question to Audience Questions. And you'll see both of those options in that little drop-down box in the chat menu. So again, you can send your questions in via chat, either to all participants or to audience questions. We're going to try to save most of the questions that are more substantive to the end of today. If you do have a really quick clarifying question or any AV concerns, if you're having trouble hearing, for example, please send those in right away, and we'll try to address those as quickly as possible. Also, a couple other quick notes. Today's webinar is being recorded, so we will provide the link after we're done today, and we'll also be sending out the slides from today's webcast to everyone that's registered. So if you have any colleagues that missed us today, they'll still be able to get this information. And lastly, if you haven't actually got a copy of the NoSA, the link is here in the slides, so you'll be able to use that. And once you exit today's webinar, you'll also be sent directly to where the NoSA is posted on the Urban website. So before we dive in too deep, we'd love to just learn a little bit more about you and where you're located. So hopefully you should see at the top left of your screen a little arrow that you can click. If you click that once, you should be able to click on your state. Excellent. Thank you, Allison. Very good. So if you want to just take a minute and do that, we'd love to see where you're calling in from. Alternatively, if you're not as comfortable with that, you can go ahead and type it into the chat box as well. We'll give you just about 30 seconds to do that. So very nice. Got people from Illinois, great. Some East Coast, a lot of East Coast actually. DC, same as us. Utah. We have another chat that says Utah as well, so a couple folks from Utah calling in. Great. Pretty East Coast heavy so far. Wisconsin. This feature. Hopefully it's not your favorite part of today's webinar, but I'm glad that you're enjoying it. Great. In just a few more seconds. Okay. We'll see. East Coasters. Wonderful. And so you can keep doing that, but for those of you that are done, if you just click the same button one more time, you can turn the arrow off so that it won't keep clicking on the slides for you. Thanks for sharing that, and we're glad to see we kind of have a wide-ranging group today. So today's agenda, so it's really all about you today and your questions, but we want to give you just some background information first. So we're going to talk about our definition of Pay for Success as the Urban Institute. We're going to talk about our initiative and the type of work that we do, and John will be helping me kind of talk through some of that today. We're also going to talk about the NoSA more specifically. So what does it say? What services do we have available? What is Urban's role in kind of the Pay for Success landscape as this objective knowledge intermediary? And we're going to end with some of the most common questions we've received so far. The NoSA was released a few weeks ago, so we have gotten a few questions already, and then audience questions as well. talk a little bit about Pay for Success more generally, just to kind of open up the frame a little bit and help you get a sense of how we view this at Urban. So I will talk a little bit about the who and then turn it over to John to talk about the what and the why. So the graphic on your screen that you should be seeing right now is from GAO, or the Government Accountability Office, their recently released report on Pay for Success. And it gives a really nice overview of the different types of organizations that are typically involved in a Pay for Success project. So the common 5 types that you see listed here are government, investors, sometimes referred to as funders, intermediaries, providers, and evaluators. We know, and if you're familiar with Pay for Success, you'll know this as well, that the roles of the different stakeholders may vary depending on the project itself and the contract, but they tend to have the ones that you see here in the graphic. So typically, the government is the one kind of originating the contracts. They have defined outcomes in mind, and they really have a specific problem that they're trying to address through Pay for Success. And they're ultimately the ones that will be back investors if the desired outcomes are achieved. So they're really driving the deal in a lot of cases. We also have the investors, so they're providing the upfront capital to finance the program, and they're receiving a return on their investment if outcomes are achieved, and the investors can be a wide range of different financial entities or foundations. We also, in the center here, the intermediaries. So they can really be kind of a jack of all trades in a Pay for Success project. They may be helping negotiate the terms of the contract and agreements with the service providers. They may be dispersing payments to service providers and overseeing the day-to-day operations and performance management. So there's a lot of different that we lost our audio. Let's see if it came back. If anyone just type in the chat that yes, you can hear me. Yes, wonderful. Sorry about that. These are the trials and tribulations of technology sometimes. And thank you for letting us know so quickly. So I'll just kind of wrap this up then with the evaluator piece, just restating that role, and measuring the outcomes achieved by the intervention of the program and determining whether payment has been triggered or should be made. And there may also be a validator piece associated with this that kind of does a check on the evaluator's work. And again, if some of this cut out, I'm not sure how much got lost, do have, the GAO report is available online, I believe, as well, so you can kind of check out their kind of rundown of this graphic. Now, and I see we have one quick question about, that I can answer really quickly about Urban Institute's role. So we see ourselves as an intermediary, so right there, smack in the middle, as an objective knowledge intermediary, so providing services that kind of help inform the deal or the transaction. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more later as well. But for now, I'm going to turn things over to John and talk a bit more about the initiative. So John, take it away.
Thanks, Kim. Can you hear me okay? Cool. Great. Wonderful. Okay. So I'm just going to briefly sort of run through what Pay for Success is. I suspect that most people on this call are familiar with this, but it's worth just taking a minute. So we really Pay for Success as an innovative financing mechanism. So this is an idea that's designed to raise capital for things that governments typically would like to do, but don't have the capital to do given the way their funding structures exist today. In raising that upfront capital, it allows them to scale evidence-based programs. Then I'll talk a little bit more about that, but really is the focus of the Urban Institute's interest in this whole concept is trying to get more evidence-based programs funded and scaled than we can using traditional financing mechanisms. It allows government to shift the risk. People don't talk about this very often. The truth is that in most of today's government financing, government bears all the risk of a transaction. And Pay for Success allows government to shift some of that risk onto a new investor, whether that's venture capital or a financial services industry or philanthropy, to allow it to innovate and accelerate and scale programs that otherwise wouldn't be able to. And all of this is intended to bring evidence-based outcomes to vulnerable populations, and that could be juveniles, that could be an adult, that could be a family, that could be a place, that could be a community. So next slide, I guess. The Urban Institute is interested in doing this, not because the Urban Institute is interested in being a part of these transactions. We do have resources that we want to make available to the community of practice, to the TTA recipients, to the sector at large. But the goal here isn't for Urban to be party to these transactions. Whether what this Pay for Success initiative is trying to do is to focus on outcomes, to translate business as usual to a world where taxpayers aren't just paying for things where government knows what it spends, but not necessarily what it buys, but rather to pay for things that have a demonstrable impact. Much of that is around prevention, although we do use a very broad definition of prevention to include things that might be thought a little bit about remediation, things like drug treatment for drug-involved offenders wouldn't probably fall into a classical prevention definition, but we want to do that. We want to do classical prevention programming. And we want to open programs. Over the last 20 years, there are a number of programs, things like supports for high-risk adolescents in their home, in their community, that have really been shown to have a repeated, demonstrable, positive effect on the lives of the people who are being intervened with. But those programs haven't scaled beyond 2 or 3 or 5% of the eligible population, and we think Pay for Success is a way to do that. We also think it's a way to build an evidence base around programs that have a couple of good quasi-experimental evaluations, build a space around them, allow them to be able to be described as proven, and then scale them. We think part of the reason why prevention programs don't get funded to the extent that the evidence suggests is supportable is that the procurement process has difficulty in many jurisdictions at the city, county, and federal level, supporting multiple years of funding, and we think Pay for Success allows a vehicle to think about things in the long term and not the short term. And what we also think will happen here is that we can motivate philanthropy and impact investors to think about putting more money into programs that promote the public good. This process of Pay for Success allows them to leverage that giving, potentially to get that back with a return, and then reinvest it back into programs that are evidence-based and serve the public interest. So in the Pay for Success initiative, so what this really is a collaboration. So the idea here is that Pay for Success is a concept, not a noun. It's not a thing yet. it's an idea that I think we all share that we're trying to create together, and we want to collaborate and want to promote transactions based on rigorous research. The evidence base around public interest investments. We want to make sure that the research designs that are used to evaluate them are rigorous, transparent, and objective. We want to create tools and tests that a next generation of pay for success to have lower transaction costs and be easier to implement than this generation's pay for success. We want to provide, obviously, training and technical assistance, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And want to create communities of practice that share lessons learned. So I'll say all that again really quickly here. But the idea here is, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Kim, but the idea here is we have a toolkit, which are a bunch of products and convenings that we are going to host at the Urban Institute. And I don't know if we said that all of this is we want to say, you know, grateful acknowledgement to the Laura and John Arnold Foundation for funding all of this work, and they are really the backbone behind all of this. And we want to create a toolkit that creates next generation products that allow the field and the sector to grow and scale and accelerate. We think there's a lot of really wonderful PayFest 101 material that exists out on the internet and in other areas, but we really want to create a bunch of Pay for Success 201 materials that's to get to the next level and answer some of the questions that are being asked on the ground as people get into these PFS programs and try and figure out how to do more of them and do bigger ones. We will create communities of practice. We're working on that around early childhood education at the moment. We're working on standing up a community of practice around Medicaid. We're working on standing up a community of practice around government, where state, county, and local government leaders and stakeholders can talk about their experiences around Pay for Success and learn from each other, and we can learn from the field what barriers and the roadblocks are so that we can address those in the toolkits and the training and technical assistance. And want to do the same thing around communities of practice for service providers and potentially intermediaries. But the focus is on training and technical assistance, and that is Kim's bailiwick. So let me do a virtual handshake and give it back to her. And thank you all so much for participating today.
John, I think that was a really helpful framing. And so I just want to build on that a little bit and kind of bring it back to our role in the field, which John has talked about, and also specifically when it comes to providing training technical assistance services. So as I mentioned earlier, we really see our role as that as an objective, not intermediary. And what that means to us is, again, that we're helping provide the knowledge, the information, the data, the kind of research translation that really helps these deals go and make sure that they're evidence-based. And because we are not offering funding, we're not investing in any of these deals, we're really able to maintain that objective viewpoint, I think. And one of the key things that I want to highlight here is that there's a lot of other intermediaries in this space, and in fact, we know many of you fit into that category, and you can, as you can see, and as you may have read, you are eligible applicants for this assistance as well. We're really excited about those partnership possibilities. But for those of you who may not be intermediaries, there's a range of services intermediaries offer, and what we're offering as part of this NoSA process is services only. So training, consulting services. The services, as John mentioned, are very generously funded through the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, so they will be free of charge, but they are services only. There's no funding attached to this NoSA. In terms of the eligible applicants, as I mentioned, they are local and state governments. Local includes city, county, whatever the case may be for your particular local government, but county is fine, I want to stress that, and state government, the federal government through this NoSA, as well as Pay for Success intermediaries. And I'm going to share the language that we use in the NoSA to define intermediaries a little bit later, but those are our two primary eligible applicants. And something important to remember here that is, if you are a government that's currently engaged with other intermediaries or TA providers, you are still eligible to apply for our assistance. Again, we're happy to collaborate with other intermediaries, and you are still eligible to apply under this NoSA. Interventions and geographies are no strings attached or restrictions there. So we are open to serving. We had one of the earlier questions we received is if it's okay if we're not a city and we're applying for this. So if you're in a more rural area, answer is yes. So we're looking for a range of geographies in terms of applicants, and same for the interventions and programs that you may be interested in. So we're not using this to focus on a particular program area. It's wide open. And to restate kind of what this is all about, and I think this came out also through what John was saying, we're really offering these services to ensure pay-for-success deals are really, the interventions being used for this are grounded in evidence, to share what we're learning through our experiences working with you all with the rest of the field, and to really ensure as much as possible that pay for success is being used appropriately to address challenges and improve outcomes. So really working with communities to figure out, is this mechanism right for them, and if so, how can they use it to move evidence forward in their community? So kind of get more specific now about the NoSA, which again stands for Notice of Support Availability. I know that may be a very new acronym to many people. And again, I want to mention that the document itself, it should lead you to that right after you close out of today's webinar. This was released on October 14th in tandem with an event that we had here at Urban with a wonderful panel about pay for success. And it's part application and part explanation of TTA services. So if you haven't read it already, I really strongly recommend that you do. But to get you started, this is what the NoSA is. So it offers in-kind support in the form of training and technical assistance from us here at Urban with the Pay for Success initiative to guide, design, and assess potential and existing Pay for Success projects. And again, just another reminder that these are services only and not funding. But that's kind of the crux of the NoSA. So if you read through it, you'll get kind of a similar introduction to the one you got today, to the initiative, to Urban, if we're new to you as well, to our training and technical assistance, and then you'll find the application pieces on those last 4 pages. So in terms of eligibility to apply, there are 2 eligible primary applicants, which I mentioned just a few slides ago. One which is, again, local, state, county government, and one that's other Pay for Success intermediaries. So this on the slide is the actual language just pulled from this about how we define intermediaries. So this includes financial intermediaries, knowledge intermediaries, however you generally define yourself, but it's organizations that provide financial or general subject matter expertise to governments and other Pay for Success stakeholders. So again, we're kind of relying on people to classify themselves, but if you have questions about that, feel free to send those in. So these groups are both eligible. State and local governments are eligible for both types of services, which I'll go into a little bit later, and Pay for Success intermediaries are eligible for one specific type of services, which again, we'll get to that in just a few minutes. Bring us to kind of what we're talking about when we say training and technical assistance, what kinds of services those are. And all of the services we offer are based around a strategic planning framework that's also laid out in the NoSA itself and is based on a paper that John was one of the primary authors of that will show up. If you have the slide version of this, you can click that link. And obviously, you see it says 5 steps, so we've modified it slightly just to better capture the services that we'll be providing. So that provides a really nice frame for the areas that we'll be providing services in. So walk through these rather quickly. Again, the paper is a great base to kind of get the detail as well as the NoSA itself. So step 1 is really figuring out what your cost and population drivers are. So you want to identify those populations that are the biggest drivers of costs in your community. That's kind of step 1 for the strategic planning process. Once you've done that, you'd move to step 2, which is identifying the nature of the target problem. So generally, once governments understand the population that is being underserved or inefficiently served and the costs that they're incurring, they're going to want to explore the nature of the problem that's preventing that effective service or potential ways to address the challenges, whatever those might be. So it's really, for step 2, we said, okay, this certain group is experiencing, is driving up costs in this way. Step 2 is really about what's causing that, what's the problem here. Step 3 is when we start to identify evidence-based interventions. So as part of our TTA, we'll be working with different communities to figure out what is the evidence base around different interventions. So depending on the area that you're looking at, it could be homelessness, could be recidivism, could be many, many different things. What does the evidence say about the interventions that are available? Then on step 4, we really look at that intervention in the pay for success context. So there's a tool that we're developing at Urban now to help us kind of identify the suitability for pay for success and how that kind of works with whatever evidence-based intervention we're looking at. The goal of that tool is to really determine if pay for success is the most cost-effective way to finance that intended intervention, given the capacity of partners, the strength of the intervention, et cetera. It's a situation where that shows that actually pay for success is not the best possible financing mechanism, then we'll work with communities to identify alternatives, and if it does seem appropriate, then we'll kind of keep working through this framework. Step 5 is crafting a suitable evaluation design. So that's really thinking about evaluation up front. So at project conception, working with communities to make sure that the evaluation is being designed in a way where it's very rigorous, transparent, and objective. I want to stress this. I think this is really one of our strengths at Urban is evaluation, and we can kind of offer those services at different times throughout the deal, serving as that voice of an evaluator. However, this particular NoSA is not being used for comprehensive evaluation services. So if you already have a pay for success bill or you've been thinking about one and you're thinking you need an evaluator over the entire multi-year process, that's not something you'd apply for through this NoSA. We do have staff here at Urban that work on those types of evaluations, and they might end up contacting you contacting them to make that happen, or through some kind of competition process. But this NoSA is really about kind of more limited evaluation services throughout the deal, but really not serving as that one major evaluator for the entire process. And then if you have questions about that, feel free to send that in. And really helping price the pay for success product. So on our side, this is really about helping sites conduct the analysis necessary to figure out what the next steps would be in determining pricing. So as you can see throughout this framework, we're really here in terms of providing translation of research, of evidence, of doing data analysis, of providing that voice of an evaluator, as well as some of the other kind of smaller things I've laid out. But I think those are the overall themes. So you'll see on the left-hand side of this slide, we've kind of broken down the things I just mentioned, those 6 steps. Tied to that are the different activities and deliverables that are available. And if this is a little hard to read, I apologize. This is also, again, copied into the NoSA itself. So again, just reviewing some of the things that I said in the last slide, you'll see that there's a lot of stress on data analysis, on really understanding the target population and the problem, understanding the evidence, communicating those results back to you, helping with that proposed evaluation design and evaluation language, and really making some recommendations around pricing. So that's kind of the crux of what the services that we intend to offer. I will say, though, this is a jumping off point. So you may be able to identify kind of where you need assistance, and we hope that you have a general idea of that, but we won't make any hard decisions or commitments until if you're selected through this NoSA, until we write that memorandum of understanding. That's really what will lay out exactly kind of what we expect to do in that scope of work. So this is jumping off point for your understanding and for conversation. So a few kind of more specific things just about the process that I want to go over, and then I want to get into questions. So one of the questions that we've already gotten most frequently is this: if you've noticed, so you saw that there were 2 different application types. There's a group 1, which is strategic planning, TTA, and TTA is training and technical assistance, and targeted support, which is group 2. So we wanted to offer 2 different types of applications because we want to get involved with pay for success projects at different stages and that may have different needs. So group 1, which is strategic planning, the only eligible applicant is a local or state government. So intermediaries cannot apply for group 1. Stress that again, intermediaries cannot apply for group 1. This is only local and state governments. It's just for local and state governments that haven't really yet started with pay for success deal construction or planning. They're in the early stage. And this group can expect to receive services in all 6 areas of that strategic planning framework that we just went over for up to 18 months. This is really a deep dive to get your Pay for Success project off the ground, to help you identify the problem that's appropriate for it, and we're going to work with you pretty intensively over those 18 months. It's going to include potentially site visits, conference calls, working closely with the stakeholders in your community, defining outcomes, and really, again, digging into that, understanding the problem and the target population. Group is a little bit different. So Group 2 is open to both local and state governments and intermediaries. And this is for projects that are a little bit further down the line and basically have already started kind of a deal implementation or are really at that stage where they're about to launch something. So as you see, as it says on the slide, you have a plan in place, but you need support in operationalizing it and making it happen. You're also going to have probably more specific and targeted needs. So that means that you may be kind of selective when looking at that framework. So we're expecting that if you're in Group 2, you're going to need services maybe in up to 4 of those areas, but not all 6 of them. So that's something to keep in mind as you're kind of deciding which category you fit into. And we'll talk more about that services open to multiple stakeholders piece in just a few minutes, but kind of hold that in your head. But those are the main distinctions, is where are you in the deal, what kind of stakeholder are you, and what level of service do you need. And this is just a quick review of the Gnosis schedule. And again, this is in the NoSA, and I believe on page 7 in the NoSA. But I want to just highlight a couple really important dates here. So one is the letter of intent to apply. So we do strongly encourage that you submit that. However, it is not required. But we do strongly encourage you to submit a letter of intent by the 13th, just so we know kind of who's interested, if you're intending to apply, so we can kind of set some internal processes in place. So again, please try to meet that if you can. If you can't, again, not required, but we strongly encourage that. And the applications themselves. So if you're a strategic planning applicant, the application is due December 18th. If you're a targeted support applicant, it's a little bit different for you because, as you might have noticed, that deadline is rolling. So we will accept Pay for Success targeted support applications kind of just into the future in general. However, if you are a targeted support applicant that wants services to begin around early next year, February or March, then you should also intend to meet that December 18th deadline. Some application tips for everyone, and these are kind of some basic things but just important to keep in mind. Make sure that you, first of all, are filling out the application for the type of support that you want. There are 2 separate application forms for strategic planning and targeted support. Make sure that the heading is the right one for the kind of support that you're looking for. Make sure that you answer all the questions. Make sure you read those sections of the NoSA that lay out the expectations of selected TTA applicants and how services are awarded, just so that you're familiar with that. I mentioned the letter of intent to apply. I want to go back to this letter of support piece. So a letter of support government official is very strongly recommended. We're really looking to see that this is not kind of the first time you've thought about this, that you have some support from a government official to move forward in exploring this or implementing it if that's the stage that you're at. However, if you do have other project partners that are involved, you can also submit letters of support from them. So that would typically be an evaluator or a service provider, and again, this will vary depending on where you are with your project. But those are optional. So if you have those, that's great. If not, that's perfectly fine. We do strongly recommend that letter of support from a government official, though. And that piece is really nice, something that we're offering for applicants after the letter of intent has been submitted. So you do need to submit that letter of intent and let us know that you're applying to take advantage of this. But we are offering application support for applicants, so up to 5 hours per application from urban staff to help you think through your application, think through kind of how you're sharing information with us, think through project a little bit. Again, that won't start until after you submitted your letter of intent, which would be in November. But that is a service that we're making available to everyone, so something else to think about. Okay, so I'm going to get into questions. I see you've had a few pop in already. And we're going to start with just a couple of the most common ones that have come in since it was released. So I'm going to read a few of these since he's been working very closely with us on this project. So Reed, one of the most common questions that we're getting is, are service providers, evaluators, or funders eligible to apply for the NoSA?
Yes, thank you, Kim. So these entities cannot be primary applicants. For entities that are primary applicants, like the local state governments and intermediaries, who already have partners or collaborators, like the ones listed above, must that their training and technical assistance services for the partner agencies be part of this process. So to do so, at this stage, applicants only need to identify who these partners might be in the application by listing them on the first page of the application in the space provided. So and technical assistance recipients will develop a memorandum of understanding in partnership with Urban that lays out a specific scope of work for services provided and who will receive those services that will be used to guide all future TTA work. So to summarize, your training technical assistance, if selected, could include assistance to these groups as providers, evaluators, and funders, but they cannot be the primary applicant.
Great, and so we've just thrown in kind of a truncated version of that answer for people that have the slides available online so that they can see it if they're not able to listen to the recording. But essentially, this just summarizes what Reed just said. So these entities listed on the slide can't be the primary applicants, but if they're part of a project or potentially part of a project, all they need to do right now is list them on the application and just let us know that they're there. And if you're selected, we'll work with you to figure out how we'll provide services to you and or those entities. So there's another one. I know we talked about this a bit, but I really want to make sure this is clear for everyone since I think it's been a little confusing in the past. So why are there two separate application types?
Yeah, we just really want to reiterate that applicants at various stages of putting together a deal are really encouraged to apply. Strategic planning, TTA, is really for governments that are just starting out, while target support is for applicants that have more specific short-term needs. So we have a diverse range of folks to feel comfortable and encouraged to apply for this assistance. Our TTA is very flexible and open, so we encourage people to apply.
Thank you. And kind of a short summary of that answer here for those that are looking at these slides later if you're not able to access the recording. And I go to our last kind of question, and then we'll dive into your question, and that is, what does a successful applicant in each of these two groups, strategic planning and targeted support, look like?
So for group one, our strategic planning group, we're looking for applicants that have talked with their local government officials already about exploring Pay for Success. So it's going to be the first time that they've ever heard the term. Conversations should already be happening. However, an applicant in this group should also not be particularly fixated on one type of path or intention yet, or at least be open to hearing more suggestions about it if they haven't started to narrow down a specific focus. So in group one, they don't need to have their problem or intervention of choice yet. They just need to be interested in exploring Pay for Success and have the resources and bandwidth to explore its suitability for their particular needs. And for group two, target support, the applicant has some sense of what their needs around Pay for Success are and has already started implementing it, or is on the verge of implementing. They be past the point of searching for what social problem to address and be more focused on what needs done to move a deal forward. So what challenges exist in implementing a Pay for Success deal, and they know what support they need to overcome them. Additionally, ideal group two applicants have some existing partnerships that they believe will help move their deal forward, and the sense of what their deal will help move the needle on specific social issue that they are confronting.
And so, again, hopefully that helps kind of clear up that difference, and we're always available both right now and after today's webinar to help clear up those questions. And I just mentioned along with that if we get an application where we feel like you're actually a better fit for the other group, so if you submit a targeted support but we really think you're really more of a strategic planning applicant, we follow up with you about that and just see kind of your thoughts on that and see if that's a better path forward. But we will get in contact with you. So now I'm going to start diving into some of the other questions that we've gotten. So there's one really quick question that I've seen, and as a reminder, and I want to make sure this is up here, if you are not sure how to submit questions, again, type them into that chat box at the bottom right of your screen, and go ahead and click either send to all participants or send to audience questions. So a quick one I saw was, can you give examples of intermediate agencies? So a couple quick examples would be third sector, social finance. Those would be a couple other kind of common ones in Pay for Success that are intermediaries. So hopefully that was helpful. And we had one question, so can you clarify the difference between intermediary and service provider? And so again, I know in certain communities, these roles shift around. They may be a little blurry depending on what's happening with your exact project. But what we're saying when we say service provider is you are the one providing these services directly to your target population. So you are the ones working the program. If you're serving people that are, let's say at-risk youth, for example, you are the provider. Your staff are the ones working with those at-risk youth day in and day out. That would be a service provider. The intermediary is more the one kind of helping hold the deal together. So they're working with multiple stakeholders on the deal. They're providing information and expertise. They're providing, urban is obviously in this bucket, so some of the services that we listed earlier, those would be things that intermediaries provide as kind of in service to the deal. So intermediary, I guess, to summarize, would be more an agency working in service to the deal, to the multiple stakeholders associated with that deal. Service provider is really focused on the target population, so the group that's being served. So hopefully that helps clarify that. A great question about the letter of intent. So what are we looking for with that letter of intent? It's a great question. I'm sorry we don't have more clarity in the NoSA itself. So as I said before, first of all, the letter of intent isn't required, just very strongly recommended and appreciated. But this is not a very formal process. So essentially all we need from you, and I'll show you my contact information at the end, just so in the NoSA, which is where you would submit it electronically, is just, who is your point of contact, what geography or what intermediary organization are you with, who's the applicant, and that you intend to apply. So this can essentially be 2 or 3 sentences saying, this is who we are, we're intending to apply for this NoSA. If you know what group you tend to apply under, whether that's strategic planning or targeted support, that's great, but that's not necessary. So this is a very informal, quick way of us to track kind of how many applications we might be expecting. There's no need for anything else at that point. You do not need your letter of support. You do not need anything else. Very formal, kind of quick and dirty there with the letter of intent. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Great. So intermediary working with a number of clients, how should we be thinking about partnering with them? That's a great question. So there's different ways to think about that, and I want to answer kind of multiple questions within that one at once. So one question that I think is part of this is if you're an intermediary or even a geography, a local or state government, and you have multiple projects, maybe you have a Pay for Success deal that's being implemented right now that you want assistance on, and maybe you have one that's still in the planning stages or still in development. You can apply for as many Pay for Success projects, or you can put in as many applications as you want, essentially, but you should have a separate application for each distinct project. So for the example I just gave, if you're a community, say you're Washington, D.C., so that's where we are, and let's say you already have a deal and progress being implemented, but you'd like more assistance, you can apply under targeted support for that. If you have another deal that you're considering, you can apply for strategic planning with that. So you can submit multiple applications. So if you're an intermediary working with a number of different clients, you can submit for each one of those clients if you'd like to. Those would just be separate applications. And that also means we're not going to necessarily accept all of them or none of them. We'll look at each application on its own merit separately. So that's one way to think about this, is if you are thinking of partnering with us on multiple projects, that's great. Just make sure that you submit a separate application for each of those. But in terms of other partnerships, so obviously we'd have to know more about the specific agency and what services you offer, but I think many of the things we're talking about here are complementary to the services that other intermediaries might be offering. So that would really be figured out in kind of that MOU follow-up question stage is what services are you offering, what do you see Urban's role, how does the community see Urban's role? So that's really flexible, I think, overall. But again, looking at our areas of expertise, research translation, evidence-based intervention, data analysis, those kinds of fields, being that voice of an evaluator, that's really where I see us doing most of our work. If those are areas where you'd like support, I think that could potentially be a good fit. Thanks for that question. Okay. And just scroll here. So, in figuring out, this is a great question. So how detailed does our effort have to be in the application? So can we offer 2 to 3 ideas, or do we need to have it down to 1? And I'm assuming that this is addressing kind of the thing about the problem that you may want to address with Pay for Success. So I think the answer depends on kind of where you are in the process. So if you're a strategic planning applicant, you're very early on, it's totally fine to not be kind of nailed down to 1 idea. In fact, that's generally what we're expecting overall, I think, is that you might not be exactly sure yet which way things will go. If you are a targeted support applicant and you start implementing something, obviously we would expect that you'd have a pretty clear idea of what's going on and that we'd be supporting you in that work. But for strategic planning applicants, no, you do not need to have it narrowed down to 1 idea. You can let us know what you've been thinking so far as part of the application, but that's not a requirement. Okay. Just go through these questions a little bit more. So one of the criteria for evaluation is other factors, as listed in the NoSA. Are there particular priorities within target population or geography that would be ranked more highly than others? That's a great question. So this is a very flexible application, I'd say, overall. And so we haven't come into this saying, we want a city of this size or we want, a particular population. We have a kind of a general theme that you've seen in the NoSA, that you've seen in this presentation, vulnerable populations, and geography is really open. So we'll be looking at, and the reason that we kind of included that as an other factor is that we'll be looking at a lot of things at once. So if we look at these applications, we'll not just be looking at your target population or just be looking at your geography. We're going to be looking at all of these factors together and kind of how that fits with us and what services we can provide for you. So no, there isn't a kind of a box you need to fit into for this assistance. It is, I'd probably say pretty safely, as flexible as it appears to be. It's pretty open. Okay. So question here. I'm going to just scan this for a sec to see if I can summarize. So would you recommend that applicants undergo an extensive review of organizational capacities before submitting an application for Pay for Success funding? Examples might be convening focus groups, meeting with stakeholders, etc. So I would say, again, I think generally when we're talking about Pay for Success, you want to, and I'm assuming this is from a service provider perspective, which as it is, again, service providers cannot apply directly, but just using that perspective to answer this question, you do want to have a sense of what's going on in your organization and what's needed to make Pay for Success successful. However, as part of our TTA, you can imagine that we'll be working with, especially if you are a service provider and are kind of tagged on to a local or an intermediary applicant, and that might be something that we work with you on, is identifying what's needed or what could be helpful you look at this process. So I would say that's kind of really up to you and thinking about what you feel comfortable with before kind of moving forward with applying for the TTA. As you saw, as part of our strategic framework, the Pay for Success kind of suitability, looking at that is part of that. So it might be that that gets covered there. So again, I think that's kind of an organizational preference piece. It's certainly something that I think would factor into a lot of our TA as part of that framework as well. Just a quick reminder question, because we've gotten a few of these quick questions. Yes, we will send out the slides afterwards if you're registered, which all of you are. And we will also be sending out the recording. So if you want to listen to this again, you are more than welcome to. I'll show, when we get to the end of today's session, you'll have my contact information as well as John's. Kim will be the person that you'll be submitting both your letter of intent and your application to, just via email. So you'll want to have my email address for sure, and that information is also in NoSA. You'll also be able to submit your questions directly to me via email. And what we've said is that we'll get back to you within 5 business days. Right now we're moving a little bit faster than that, but it will depend on kind of the volume of questions that we're seeing. Okay, just scrolling through here. Thanks for all of these great questions. So we got examples of intermediaries. I've gotten some questions about kind of, again, what kinds of projects we're open to. So I got an example of an economic development project. So I'd say, again, this is a pretty wide open NoSA. Urban focus and kind of our framework pay for success has generally been vulnerable populations. Other than that, you know, I wouldn't put a lot of restrictions around the type of deal. So it's really, this process is about us getting to know kind of what your goals are, what you're working on, what you're thinking about working on, and moving from there. And just to reiterate, since this question came up again, and as far as Urban's role, it's really about being that knowledge intermediary. So if we go back to that GAO slide, then it shows you the different stakeholders there. That's really where we're seeing our place in this. And so there's a couple more specific questions that I think I want to take offline. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we will save this question box and try to follow up with those of you that had additional questions that we couldn't get to today. So make sure we have those files saved. I want to do just a quick check, and I think I know the answer to this for some of you, but we're going to do a quick check just to see kind of how many of you have questions remaining about the NoSA. And again, keeping in mind that you will be able to reach out to me directly with those questions. So go ahead and take that poll. It should have just popped up on your screen. It should say yes, no, or not sure. And take a second to do that. Take a couple seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and close this out because that takes another minute or so. It's looking like, as this will pop in your screen in just a few minutes, we have a lot of no answers. We may still be just kind of processing, which is fine. Quite a bit of no's and some not sure's and some yeses. So that's about what we expected. So hopefully this helped answer some of your questions. And maybe not all of them, which is absolutely fine. We've still got quite a bit of time left in this process to answer them. And I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. We're really excited about this, really excited to engage with all of you as part of this process and as part of this initiative. So this is my information. So again, my email's up there, just kwalker@urban.org, as well as my phone number. And you have John's information as well. So again, you'll be sending your application, your letter of intent, pretty much anything around this NoSA directly to my email address. And just keep in mind when you submit the application, there are some guidelines in the NoSA for how that should be formatted. So the font, the spacing, that kind of thing, the format we want PDF applications. So make sure that you review that before you submit. And I thank John and Reed also for joining today and offering their expertise. And we will be kind of getting back to those of you. If we didn't get to your question today, we had quite a few, so we apologize. But thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.